So hi, everyone, on this very busy Thursday where things seem to be just happening all over the place. So I thank you for coming out. This is the start of our spring semester engagement with interrogation of issues associated with the contemporary moment. We continue our critical exploration of these processes affecting sea changes, I'd say more appropriate now, in our epoch of the Anthropocene. Our premise in our group here is that decolonization is the ethical response to planetary devastations. Takes our cue from the wonderful essay written by Denise Ferreira da Silva called Ancestral Claims, and takes our cue from what we believe, we think has been acknowledged, that it is after the 15th century, coincident with the European explorations and discoveries, quote unquote, of other worlds via colonialism, colonization of various forms, whether of exploitation or settler types, that the impact of such extractive enterprises, genocidal projects, were experienced globally. Hitherto, of course, experienced locally. In one of the more comprehensive and succinct analyses of the outcome of such capital accumulation processes, in her book, Expulsions, Brutality, and Complexity in the World Economy, Saskia Sassen notes the shift that has seen the global North mimic differentially and through various mediations the extractive mechanisms rehearsed in the global South, but through different mechanisms, for example, the subprime mortgages, which underscores the global impact of these disastrous reconfigurations of the earth and the seas. Sassen argues that the concepts of poverty and injustice do not entirely grasp the expulsive orientations of these displacements, these dispossessions and general brutalities in the world. This is key. Certainly, we go further to argue that this complexity of such brutalities requires us to examine these outcomes through even finer tooth optics, understanding, for example, the issue of raciality, for instance, and the role it plays in defining who and where these brutalities impact more forcefully. In fact, my colleague Patricia Northover and I argue in the forthcoming volume that we wish to unthink, rethink, and politicize the idea of global Blackness alongside notions of decoloniality as being both projects and processes that are fundamentally intertwined insofar as Blackness presents itself as a condition of untenable, fungible, fugitive, and opaque being in the world, while decoloniality is a veritable undoing and exceeding of violent colonial disorders. Approaching these issues also, as our speaker, Professor May Joseph, argues, require that we think in terms of territory, as well as oceans and seas as veritably linked, and craft our responses, our arguments, our performances, or recommendations within these articulations. In her forthcoming text, Aquatopia, Professor Joseph offers a methodology that allows us to apprehend this approach. Working at the intersection of land and seas, she states that, and I quote, "The performance work of Harmattan Theatre, which she has founded, has involved a persistent inquiry into the junctures between colonial histories, coastal landscapes, island ecologies, and human sociality. Drawing on the idea of aquapelagic assemblage as an aesthetic practice, they explore since 2009 as historical experiments towards this praxis of such assemblage." And I quote again, she quotes Philip Hayward, coins this concept, aquapelagic assemblages that are water-bound interfaces between animate and inanimate entities. And I quote, according to her, they occur performatively at the threshold between social life and environmental landscapes involving aquatic spaces. Professor May Joseph is Professor of Global Studies in the Department of Social Science and Cultural Studies at Pratt Institute and founder of Harmattan Theatre, an environmental theatre company based in New York City, combining critical cultural theory and environmental practice in her scholarly research. Professor Joseph has written widely on globalization, urbanism, performance, and visual culture. Her work explores the junctures between cities, performance, water ecologies, and coastal futures. Her books include Fluid New York, Cosmopolitan Urbanism and the Green Imagination, Nomadic Identities, the Performance of Citizenship, which I'm very familiar with because I used it in my citizenship class. Always interested in the Indo-African kind of connection and the ways in which belonging has been evolved in these post-colonial African states. And also, she's co-editor of Performing Hybridity. Since 2009, she has created community-based site-specific performances addressing water issues along river and ocean cities around the maritime world, including Istanbul, Venice, Amsterdam, Cochin, Delhi, Cape Town, Lisbon, New York. That's the world. Her directorial interests lie in bringing together questions of water politics, dance, trance movement traditions, ritual performance art, mime, images, and text into conversation with coastal societies. She will address on the topic Harmattan Wind and Tropospheric histories. It'll probably last for about 30, 45 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer period. Please join me in welcoming Professor May Joseph. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course, yes. Hello, everybody. It's such an honor to be here at Duke. My book, Fluid New York, came out of Duke, and the great editor, Ken Visaka, is here. So I've had a long relationship with Duke online. But it's a tremendous honor. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the Entanglements Project, which is a fabulous title for many questions that I'm working on as well. And I want to begin with, first of all, thanking Michaeline Kirchler for inviting me, and to Denise, wherever you are. Hello, an old friend, Denise. And Denise reads tarot, and she's read My Future, but 15 years ago. She's amazing. And thank you to the Franklin Humanities Institute staff and Michaels, the multiple Michaels, for making my stay here so pleasant. And thank you to the audience for engaging my work. My talk is organized in two sections. I want to first present some frameworks that are influencing how I'm thinking about climate issues today. And the second part will be the slideshow part, which will be the actual case studies that I'm looking at. My work of the last 20 years has involved the study of oceans and riparian societies, looking at the Hudson River, the Periyar River in Kerala, and I've been involved in island studies, dealing with multiple islands around the world. And my approach has been to deploy theatrical techniques as a climate tool, to find ways to engage with communities in very vulnerable and precarious coastal locations around the world. But along the course of my work the last 20 years, I've come to understand Rachel Carson's invitation for us to consider what lies under the sea. And this is a very difficult challenge, and there's some brilliant scholars working on pipelines and, all sorts of sort of technological mechanisms that are shaping the laws of the sea today. But my own challenge in thinking about the sea in the context of Kerala coast, which is South India, led me to the study of sand. There's a lot of toxic sand, and as you know, sand is the new oil. And sand mining, sand extraction, sand corruption, and sand erosion are some of the most challenging processes that are shaping coastlines and oceans and islands around the world. So the task to think about sand for me was a new one. But what I didn't realize was the role of memory in my methodology of sand. I'm from Tanzania, East Africa, and I grew up in the Middle East, and my parents then moved to Kerala, South India, and I came to New York. So this sort of multiple migration sort of displaces one relationship to locality and to ecology sometimes. But sometimes memory can be a very useful tool. So my research on sand opened up the extraordinary archive that I embody in the study of sand. But it it raised for me this point that Bruno Latour makes in his book Down to Earth, where Latour says, the new climate regimes have been crossing our borders for a very long time, exposing us to all the winds. And these new migrations have no form or nation. And by this, he means the new migrations are that of erosion, resource depletion, species die out, climate. And I found this phrase of Latour's very inspiring for my work. However, over the last 5 years, over the course of my relationship, I've been doing work with the National Science Foundation. I have found a huge divide between the philosophy and history of climate, in the case of Dipesh Chakrabarty, who invites us to think about a species history, and Latour's formulation of new climate regimes. In tension with this is the numerous conversations I've had with scientists. And let me just say that in some cases, I was in a room where there were like 400 scientists and 8 social scientists. By the way, my PhD is in theater. I'm even like an interloper everywhere. And so I think it's this not having a discipline that has opened me up to the climate studies more easily. But to come back to the point that the National Science Foundation's research guidelines and application guidelines are very specifically nationally grounded. So if you extend the study of the coast and the shoreline, even a little bit towards the Caribbean, these proposals are not considered legitimate, like it's exceeding the guidelines. And arguing for the pertinence of the Caribbean to the study of climate and the oceans seems to me like a bizarre, it's the shared ocean of the Atlantic. And yet seeing how these grants are formulated so strictly to follow the federal guidelines opened up for me both the challenges of the new climate regimes, which both Latour and Chakrabarty, but also multiple scientists have been asking for very broader conceptualizing in a planetary scale of how we think about our methodologies, our questions, and the multiply complex, nuanced, disciplinary traditions out of which these questions are going to arise. So this tension for me became very clear when I looked at the challenge of studying sand. And I want to now refer to your title, which is Climate Change, Decolonization, and Global Blackness. And for me, this is extremely useful in addressing the question of sand, because studying the Sahara Desert and studying the question of sand at the atmospheric level very quickly demonstrates the limitations of these very national, regional categories of studying and thinking about science. Now, and let me say that in the last few years, because I've had the opportunity to talk with people in this National Science Foundation, there's been a huge divide that I see between the science of climate and the science of the funding for climate, which the infrastructure, the Infrastructure Reduction Act and the Climate Bill, which I looked closely both at, they demonstrate this tension. There's plenty money out there for infrastructure, engineering, the science of climate, and there is no money for social, scientific, humanities-oriented, artistic, involvement, engagement with communities who are Black and Brown communities, who are the most endangered communities in the United States. And having involved myself in many of these grants at the National Science Foundation, I had enormous trouble with the formulation of these scientific grants. They violate some of the basic expectations of anthropology and ethnography. They are extractive. They use communities just for resource extraction, like how is it flooding, what's your mold, and they pay these people like gift cards of $25. I was shocked. I was like, can you increase it to 100? And so clearly they will never invite me back. So just to say, I was shocked that there's such a divide between the science of climate, which are, let me just say, $500 million grants we're looking at. These are not small grants. And you give me $25 and $50. No, not 50, that's me. $25 to get resource extraction. And I was proposing these grants should be investing in 3 to 5 year multi-generational discussions on climate and training them to report back in slow process of understanding a shared co-production of knowledge of climate. So this is what I want to say. This is the framework of the limitations of how we think about science and funding in the United States and the more pressing, urgent, catastrophic implications of flooding and coastal. And let me just say, flooding is not coastal anymore. Much of the Midwest is sinking. Much of California is on fire and sinking. People have forgotten where the water is. People have forgotten where the landfills are. People forget where the reclaimed land is. I was Googling Durham to see what is your story here, because I was flying thinking so much sinking land as was coming on the plane. And I was like, where are the rivers? What's your water source? Where have you built over your properties? What's sinking here? I was really interested in your topography, and I realized nobody here knows. You have to go back to 1800 maps, and even they have forgotten. So I think this is a story of the United States, but in New York, we're very much in touch with the forgetting because we are sinking. And the problem with the US is that much of the US South cannot talk about climate because of the policies, the very Republican policies that is shaping how you talk about climate. And in Texas and Florida, which is sinking, they cannot talk about climate. And a lot of the funding is accessing climate bill funding. This huge contradiction between the realities of climate, which is extreme heating in California and extreme sinking in Florida, which is subsidence, the biggest problem. So this contradiction is shaping how we understand global climate politics. Now I want to shift to my talk, which is coming out of this study of sand, because I've been studying sand in New York for 25 years. And we are very concerned with sand. And in Florida, they're stealing sand from everywhere. So because no one can take sand anymore, and everybody needs sand to buffer up their North Carolinas and the South Carolinas and your coastal beautiful towns that no one should be living in, and is facing managed retreat problems. So this is a very challenging conversation when we talk about sand. It's a highly politicized problem, but what is interesting is that there is no research on sand in the United States because sand is considered a poor person's problem, because sand is Africa, sand is Asia. We don't have a problem with sand. My sense is the research I've been reading on sand is coming out of Iran, Iraq, India, Middle East, and Korea. I don't see any serious papers on sand coming out of the very well-funded global hemispheric northern and western science communities, because sand is considered sort of a marginal part of the oceanic or the atmospheric. So I want to shift to my talk, but also talk about how my work is now thinking about more like a post-normal climate approach. And this is a group of scientists who've been saying, we're in the era of post-normal climate. In other words, it's not climate as usual, it's climate as exceptional. And we need to be rethinking our methodologies, our approaches, and our disciplinary assumptions, and everything is falling apart. We need each other in terms of the multiple scientific communities talking together and the multiple communities across the humanities, the arts, and the social sciences talking together. But this isn't happening. I'm saying what Michaeline is doing here is part of the small gestures to transform knowledge in the big sphere, But co-production means bringing together scholarly actors, populations from different spheres of communities who are actually deeply involved in the process of climate adaptation. They need to have a say and be part of this conversation. So it's a very highly striated proposal when we come to co-production of climate uncertainty. In the face of such challenging prospects, I have been turning to my family's photographs. And I'm going to share with you images that are from the 1980s, because my family lived in Qatar, Doha, in the 80s for a very long time. And that period has now completely is a lost time. And the photographs I'm showing you were not allowed to be taken. They were taken secretly, and because Qatar is a super surveilled state, and you can be deported if you're seen with a camera. So again, keep in mind that my family pictures I'm sharing are part of a proposal for me of how we can enter the conversation of climate. And this is coming around from conversations I'm having with friends in New York about how, what are we going to do to change public opinion in the United States? Like, what happens when, Biden's gone and they come back with all these scary, taking away all the EPA guidelines and, pulling apart all the efforts being made at the moment to return to what it was like before Trump took over, because, they redid about over 160 environmental laws. So we still even haven't begun to, turn that clock back. And so one strategy is to make climate personal. And the United States is such a large place. People do not feel any connection between the single-use plastic bag and the Sahara Haze and the Caribbean. But that connection is immediate and deep. And and this is the challenge in the US. We don't have to buy into the climate issue because we're such a vastly, resourceful and rich and enormous country. So this is the challenge. And so my methodology has been to start telling stories. And this is methodologies coming out of the Pacific Islands, who have been using the storytelling that they presented at the IPCC a few years ago, saying, we use small stories to change our populations to understand the impact of climate. So my small story starts with dreams. My father passed away in 2016. I was looking at photographs, and my dreams of happy family time is Doha, where my family were very happy. And we walked through this gorgeous ecology of dunes. Doha is full of dunes. Qatar is in the Persian Gulf. My family lived in the Persian Gulf for 20 years. And I'm going to show you photographs from two sections of Qatar, on the west side and the east side. And I want to say that these photographs are accounted to the narratives of empire when we think of desert. The desert in colonial narratives, which so profoundly shape our imagination, is a place of waste, of redundancy, of aridness, of emptiness, of non-productivity, and ultimately of death and migration. It's the Sahara Desert most powerfully. So in contrast with that, I want to bring you to this place called the Persian Gulf that in 50 years will be completely uninhabitable. And there is a measurement that scientists use to projected measure in this post-normal climate science approach of what will the modeling look like of, what societies are going to be most affected. And 12 of the 17 most affected societies in the Middle East and North Africa. However, and the richest ones, Doha, which is Qatar, UAE, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi, will be the most affected because of the wet bulb temperature that is used as a barometer of humidity and heat. And this combination, and what is a projected combination, there's a number they throw out, which is 35 degrees. And to exceed 35 degrees will make that region uninhabitable. And this is true with about 12 countries in the Middle East and North Africa. And Qatar is one of the top. And so the dunes that I'm showing you are dying ecology, but I want to also remind us that the Persian Gulf is this incredibly rich biomarine environment with aquifers and grasslands, meadows, coral reefs, and really gorgeous. So they have over 600 fish species. They have the largest date palm forest in modern Kuwait that is all considerably destroyed and eroded. And now they have massive algal bloom infestation around sort of the Iran coast. So in Bandar Abbas. So there are these massive climatological issues that have taken over the Middle East while they continue to be the world's most aggressive carbon emitters. So there is this huge tension between these societies now, between the rich who do not want to compromise on the question of the climate, while the societies are getting even more uninhabitable, and the poorest societies like Oman and Morocco and Yemen, who are really hoping the global climate community will persuade the rich societies of the world to stop emissions so that mitigation can be an option. So these are these complicated conversations that are shaping the study of sand. But my memories of sand, this is this rich ecology of the Persian Gulf, which is called the Arabian Gulf, depending on which side of the political equation you are, whether you're on the Iran side or the Saudi Arabia side. But my family's memories are these incredible, sensual memories of walking on sand. My parents would go to sand every weekend. They would take us to the dunes. They're very anthropomorphic. They're sensual. They have music. These sands move. They are sensuous. When you walk, you're knee deep in the sand. You're swimming in the sand. And the sand changes textures every day, and they move over a period of time to a different location. They are alive. And so I've been shifting away from the colonial narrative of the sand to think about the sand as a biome. Once you think of sand as a biome, it's a living entity, it's a dynamic entity. And I want to tell you about this inland sea area, because I'm sure many of you will may have not heard of this particular sort of body of water. But it's exquisite. It's located between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, so it's extremely surveilled, but is also geologically an extremely beautiful environment, one where the sand has been so much eroded, but you can see they have these four-wheel drives that they use them to bomb the sand for fun. Well, it's really destroyed the dunes. The dunes are very delicate. They should be preserved, and they should be heritage sites. And in the time when we were there, they were considered open and wild wilderness, and were used in a manner that has considerably compromised the dunes and eroded them to such an extent that climate is now very severe in these regions because these dunes are damaged. This is the region of the inland sea that I wanted to show you, that my family would go to. It's just quite spectacular. Of course, you can see the four-wheel drive there, but the color of the water, for me, this drama is so extreme because in Kerala, like in the coast of the United States, we have a terra aqueous region. In other words, there's land, then there's a whole region that's damp, wetlands like the Carolinas. It's a lot of wetness. And then you get to the coast. But with the Middle East, it's the sand into the ocean. It's this dramatic, it's not Calcutta, it's not terra aqueous Bengal Delta, it's not mud groves of Kerala, it's not New York City. It's this clear encounter. And for my family, this was me at 18 on this dune I'm talking about, the inland sea. But you can see the reef. I only have like 4 images of Qatar because we were not allowed to take photographs. My family lived there 25 years. It was taken illegally, but you see the reef action there that creates this. These are family pictures, but the desert swimming we would do, we would just wander the desert. It's very mesmeric. Now, in those days, you know, this is my family. Again, I said I chose sharing cheesy photographs, but see how shallow the reef action of the inland sea is. And I was thinking back to this because this ecology has changed dramatically. Now, I've never been to Qatar since we left. I'm actually on this secret police list because I was swimming, you know, in these places you're not supposed to and taking photographs. So in those days, there was fully surveillance and you were always on some secret list and you would never be allowed back in. So, but for me, these photographs are photographs of memory, of love and happy times in my family. And it's desert swimming that we did. We did a lot of walking in my family coming from Tanzania were beach bums. It was wherever the beach was, but then they had the deserts and we discovered this incredible place that would be so exciting to walk into. And I'm drawing this because the Middle East now is this furious, drying, intense place that is too hard to live in. The outdoors is become quite formidable for human habitation. And the memory I have is this very beautiful, sensual place that is very special in its ecological ambience. But the wind that I missed, it was the wind I grew up with, but I didn't know the name. The Shamal wind is this incredible drama. And understand this is part of the Sahara ecology, but I'm starting off with my teen years. I'm going to take you back to my childhood. Hold on there. But this wind that comes from Iran and Iraq all the way down the Persian Gulf, through the Euphrates and down through Saudi Arabia, I had no idea it becomes so furious. It used to be a very disruptive wind in my time. But today, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, their biggest challenge is the Shamal wind. It has become drier. The dunes are gone. There's no protection. The rivers have dried up. There's huge water wars because the Shat al-Arab, the longest navigational river, is controlled by Turkey. And so there's no more water coming down the Euphrates and Tigris. It's a huge situation there. The Gulf has become very eutrophic. It's become filled because of erosion, become again uninhabitable. There's fish kill going on, and this wind is getting more and more intense. And this is the map that blew me away that I wanted to talk to you about. Is that this wind goes all the way from Iran and Iraq to Pakistan and Afghanistan and South Asia, and I had no idea that we are in a shared troposphere, and if the National Science Foundation is only thinking about the US as a category and not saying, oh my God, we should care about the Sahara Haze, then we are not looking at a climate regime that's engaging with planetarity, which of course, Spivak has a great essay on planetarity, but truly taking that invitation to open up our methodologies and our questions, but also our funding, you know, because these poor nations are the ones doing research, but they need much bigger science funding to ask bigger modeling questions. So for me, this is, and I've been working on the Indian Ocean for the last, as I said, doing work on the ocean the last 20 years, but I never thought about the atmosphere as this tropospheric place. It's the space between 5,000 and 20,000 feet, where the troposphere is where the atmospheric elements of sand, it's called sand transports, these like waves of sand that are traveling through the hemisphere, through all the way through Asia to the Gobi Desert and all the way to the Hawaiian Islands, and the other side all the way to the Americas and down to Brazil, massive transports of sand. So I want to bring you back to where I'm from. I'm from Tanzania. I grew up in Dar es Salaam. I went to school in Arusha, 1960s, 1970s. And this place in Arusha, where I went to school, in the border of Kenya and Tanzania, was a very dusty place. And there were these cyclones of sand when I'd walk to school, very difficult to walk to. They'd be like complete, when they came, they were frightening. And walking to school, there was nothing. You just have to kind of do this. That's what I was told to do. And by the time I left, you were like soaked in orange sand. And, you know, it was really very disruptive. And I thought, whoa, the Shamal wind, that is crazy. And I was like, wait, I remember this wind. I wonder what happened to this wind. And I'm offering a methodology. And this is a methodology of the personal, of the investigative, of the Benjaminian sort of dreamscape illuminative methodology of Proust looking back to the past. And this is what I found. This terrifying image in 2017 of this little sand clouds, these cyclones, that had become, this is Arusha in 2017, this extraordinary dust event that was 3 days long. It paralyzed the city. They could not, this is the airport. They couldn't have any visibility for 3 days. It created massive health problems. They do not have the technique to cope with such a, what we call a catastrophe. This would be, this would be a massive sort of a disaster event in the United States, because this dust is all over. There's no easy way to retrieve yourself out of such a dust event. And you can imagine on the pulmonary and public health impact of dust. And I was very moved by this. And I thought, oh my God, this is like, wait. And when I was growing up, we didn't have a name for it. I didn't know it was the Harmattan Wind. I didn't know the Harmattan Wind came all the way to East Africa. I thought it just went west. So my thinking of the Sahara as a biome is an effort to open up the questions of climate on a planetary scale. And the biome suddenly makes me realize, oh, the Sahara is this rich biome of phosphorus and iron. It's very rich, which is critical to many regions of the world. I did not understand that Sahara was key to the biosphere in general, both in Asia, but also in the Americas, because it carries transportation of iron and phosphorus, which is central to the Caribbean, central to the Atlantic Sea, and as well as the ocean, and central to apparently the Brazilian rainforests. The Sahara carries 100,000 tons of sand every year from West Africa to the Americas, to the Brazilian rainforest. Of that, it drops 20,000 tons in the Atlantic Ocean, of which this 20,000 dry sinking air, it's called the Sahara layer, presents a mitigating action on the Caribbean hurricanes. So for the last hundreds of years, the hurricanes in the Caribbean have been mitigated by Sahara sinking sand, which shifts the density of the Atlantic so that the warm air and the warm currents moving north are interrupted by this dry sinking sand. And this transportation goes through the Americas, goes down to the Brazilian rainforest, where it drops another 22,000 tons of phosphorus in the Brazilian rainforest, which has been central to the rainforest being rejuvenated, because they lose about 20,000 tons of phosphorus every year through the river systems of the Amazon. A very delicate balance. And this balance is fascinating. I had no idea on the extent of the sand transport and its implications. But the bigger implications was also for the Caribbean, which I would like to end as I begin to show you some of the images of the biome of sand. And suddenly, to me, studying the Atlantic meant studying the sand, the wind, and the ocean in this interrelational way, because the challenge now, and this is why post-normal climate sciences means a lot, the Arctic is melting. And as the Arctic melts, the nucleation of sand on water is shifting, because of the density of the water from the Atlantic North is shifting to the density of the water Atlantic South. So the warm waters of the Caribbean now that have customarily gone up north and coursed through, moving up and warming up the waters in Europe, are now being impeded by the shifting of the density. And what's happening now is that the Caribbean region and the waters of the Atlantic and further down in the Gulf Stream area is moving sideways, because it has nowhere to go, because the cold, fresh water is coming down. So the Caribbean is expanding sideways as opposed to its millennia rhythm of going northward. This is creating a whole new implication for regions of the world in the Atlantic area, where the climate is going to shift on the coastlines of the Caribbean countries and the eastern seaboard of the Americas. This has huge implications, because again, the wealthy nations will adapt. They will build higher, they'll be bigger, their cars will keep getting bigger, their homes will get bigger. But the point is, it should be mitigation, because poorer nations cannot afford to adapt. We have to be mitigation. If you read the IPCC reports of the last, say, 6-7 years, you will see a big disjuncture between which countries are calling for mitigation, coming from the global south. Kerala cannot afford to change. We have too much of a big population. We want mitigation. But the IPCC, there's a big divide between rich countries. They talk about adaptation. They're building higher, bigger, stronger, lighter, greener. But the poorer countries, which is the bulk of Asia, if you look at the map of Asia from Mombasa through South India, through Aceh, Southeast Asia, all the way to Japan, it's archipelagic. It's low-lying islands. The largest Gulf conglomeration islands is the Indonesian, Philippines, and all between. This is all sinking lands. The projection of the IPCC is that the global climate will be rising 1 meter in this century, and in the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, 2 to 9 inches. 2 to 9 feet. 2 to 9 feet, man. Because I can't imagine feet. I keep shrinking it to inches. Huge difference, because they're all coast, like the extravagant cities of Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Qatar, like all in the water, right? And it's all going to be. So I want to share with you some images of the Harmattan, which is known as the Sirocco and Hamsin in the north, and the Harmattan in the west. It goes to Brazil. And it is this super activity of heat that we don't take seriously enough, but is impacting the entire Mediterranean. And the last 3-4 years, this has gone all the way to the Tyrian and Aegean Sea, much of Italy, all the way to Zurich. And apparently this year, last year, it went all the way up to the Netherlands and Greece. What? This is like the Italy side, and then the other side is Greece. So Italy, Greece, Portugal, Iberia. This is the region. Completely. It's the winds have no borders, so it is impacting Turkey very much. Yes, you said Anatolia, right? Yes. Yes. So these winds are considered dusty winds. They're not taken too seriously up in Zurich, because it's like, oh, look at the gorgeous sunset. If you see a gorgeous sunset, check your weather meter, because it's going to tell you this is sand transportation. So I started picking photos from my friends around the world in 2020, when the biggest plume ever happened. This was during COVID. If you remember, we were all like indoors, but this fantastic sunset that was going on. Cairo. This is the Nile. My friend was in the Nile, Martin, very kindly started sending me these fabulous pictures. I was like, what the heck? Why is your sunset so orange? And it was like Berlin, Austria, super prismatic sunsets in Austria. Austria looks cheerful, you got to worry. Seriously, it's like, because it's the Harmattan, it's not good news. New York City, it was so orange for days. It was so orange, and it was, of course, public health issues like watch out because the air is not good. But they don't say this deeply. No one has heard of the Harmattan wind. No one knows the Sahara is coming through the Americas. This is South Carolina. These are all pictures I picked Googling 2020 sand transport, Sahara Haze. St. Augustine, Austin, Texas, Arkansas, Myrtle Beach. You can see the haze here, right? You can actually see this. It's hard to see it on these photographs unless you're there, and sometimes you probably don't even see it. You just cough a lot and you realize, oh my God, what's wrong? Why am I coughing? So, and I want to share, this was last year. I had to share this. It's so frightening, because that's the sand transport, all of this. And this is Portugal and France, and the sand from the Sahara going north. It's massive. And I tried my hardest to save it. You know how you download images? Well, the sound goes all the way, it's like this. But by the time I download the image, it's not showing the sound in my camera. It shows, because I saved the image on the camera, it shows the full thing. You can see the sound going like this. It goes all the way to western to California. Like, I didn't realize the sand pattern is so, of course, right? It's atmospheric. It has these different currents. I was trying to capture it. Just the drama that it has no borders. It has no boundaries. And it's impacting all of us. But as I want to point out, I'm just scrolling through this image. It's the Copernicus. So like Noah, in Europe is Copernicus. They have this huge satellite data visualization information. It's all public. But I want to say this particular image should have sand all the way to sand. It is quite frightening. This is the plume of 2020. Can you see the plume? That's Africa. This is the plume. And this is the United States. And the Caribbean is here. You can see this.
So this is defined as sand. I mean, it's not a cloud. I mean,
no, it is defined as tropospheric, atmospheric event. So it's cloud action. That is dust. It's described as dust, not sand. And let me just finish. This is the last cloud. This is the last image. I want to make sure it plays. Hi. I wanted to play. Okay, see that? And that's the last image for my talk. But thank you for asking me this very good question. Is it, the terminology, and the terminology will shift depending on who's looking at the problem from the different scientific papers, but it is considered dust particulates. And this dust, by the way, is very rich in nutrition. It has multiple, it carries a lot of seeds from Africa. So there's a lot of biodiversity that's traveling in these transports. But it's also some toxicity as well that it's picking up along the air and bringing that along as well. And the thing is, it's also dropping nutrients. And if indeed the climate is heating as quickly as we are, then these excessive nutrients generates other issues. Because, algae blooms, for instance, is because the water is too nutritious. And it's generating, therefore, a different kind of information to plants that then start dying, which these algal bloom events around the world. In Kerala, which is South India, it's completely infested with algal blooms because of toxic water, which is man-made. But then I did not realize these sand transports are coming all the way to India, and not just North India, it's affecting all the way down to the south. So I want to sort of back off a little bit in closing to say that to take your challenge of thinking in a decolonial way, to take the histories of the past, which my book Sea Log and Fluid New York was doing, to look at because the anthropogenic impact is clearly over 500 years since the beginning of European invasion and empire building. The thing is, these incursions of Europe were left behind massive physical traces in the Indian coast. There are forts, there are old ports, there are old buildings that were British factories and Dutch factories and Portuguese factories that now people have transformed into other things. This was big, heavy infrastructure. And so these are the ruins of the anthropogenic past on which now there are new anthropogenic incursions happening with post-independence acceleration of climate impact, right? In the case of the Middle East and North Africa, which is the focus of my talk today, it's to stage the challenge. The challenge in a decolonial approach is not to keep holding the past as accountability. The question is accountability to the Persian Gulf states, to the rich nations, to India and China, to asking, accountability from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Like, what are the approaches they're going to have to take? And what are our approaches as historians and social scientists in refining the kind of questions we ask, but also the kinds of collaborative co-producing techniques we can harness? Me as an artist, I'm trained as a theater person. I've used my skills entirely funded by myself. My accountant said, bad business plan. I was like, that's why I do theater, because I do free theater. Who in America does free theater? Totally people with bad business plans. But it takes that kind of innovative, inquisitive, interrogative techniques that are not necessarily quantifiable and not necessarily hard science. And this is where the two scientists who proposed this very useful technique, and I really love it, and they are quite brilliant, from Funtowitz and Ravitz. And they proposed in 1990s that science as we know it is no longer useful. It's, of course, always science is useful, but not adequate to address the huge amount of uncertainty and huge amount of human input required to fully begin to account for the new ways in which science and policy and infrastructure are going to have to co-share and co-develop in the face of planetary, cross-border climate change. I wish I was religious. I would say, please God, but I think we need science and we need innovation and we need funding for the Caribbean, specifically for the Caribbean, but also for African and sinking states around the world. And it's astonishing how little money these wealthy countries are doing, including the United States, for a planetary approach to change. At least from the guidelines of the IPCC, this is what I've left with, that there's a very little, still inadequate investment in offering the countries most vulnerable and most immediately impacted by climate, which will be much of the global South and the Middle East. And these will be unprepared countries, but this is going to be the reality of the future, because as you point out in the title of the research seminar, the anti-Blackness informing science funding and research science is very much part of the colonial baggage that third world countries are wasted. They will be sacrificed and they are expendable. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. So I think we are facing that very dire situation. And I look forward to hearing more about how you are all thinking much more smart and much better funded than I am. So I'm expecting some really good challenges to my talk. Thank you.
South, I wondered whether you were also comparing areas within the global North itself that seem to mimic the conditions that obtain in what's perceived as the third world.
Oh, yes, that's New York City.
New York City.
But New York City is the third world too. I mean,
yeah,
depends where you live,
course,
right?
exactly.
Like, I mean, thank you. No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's such a great question.
I was thinking of Katrina.
Exactly. Well, that was the beginning of this huge conversation that we need new terminology, because calling African Americans in the United States internally displaced peoples when they've been here for 400 years, they arrived at the same time as, white settlers, and now are being designated internally displaced peoples because they came from the sixth arrondissement, the sixth, the section of New Orleans that was the levees broke, and they were displaced to all sorts of places that were very remote, and they were called IDP. This was a huge challenge, and it's come under tremendous criticism. And let me just say, as it is clear, we are all going to be facing massive climate displacement across the United States. The peoples most affected are Black and brown poor communities, because the wealthy who are also living in these very endangered, they will harness they have the smartest lawyers, they have the smartest, accountants, they have the access to bolster their dunes, they have technologies of engineering to harness. So you see this in New York City. The wealthy neighborhoods have already built dunes, raised their area, have got, buttressing. But the point is, it's a 520-mile shoreline, New York City. It's an archipelago of 40 islands. You can't just save downtown Brooklyn and the Wall Street. You can't just save like Dumbo because that's where the rich live. That's where they have the dunes. You can't save like Sheepshead Bay and Jamaica Bay and, much of Queens and Brooklyn, which is all sinking already. But in 20 years, they will be unlivable. And the question is, has a large population, not such a large population, what are we going to do? So your question about, are there places in the global north, this scenario in New York is very extreme because New York has much more in common with Cochin, where my family comes from, or Jakarta, because it's built by the Dutch. The original floor plan and the urban plans are 600 onto parts of the Dutch. The New Amsterdam was the least interesting and the smallest of their ports, but it has a core, and so they're all sinking at the same time. But that's New York. But to take your invitation even further, think about Germany's floods 2 years ago. Oh, it's actually last year. The massive sinking of the rains in Germany and how much catastrophic sinking, because even the wealthy North have forgotten where the water is. They have built over their rivers, but they have the investment in climate. We've been denying climate for 4 years during Trump. We've lost major time in addressing infrastructure, in attending to it in the United States after so much climate denial. So we're really behind. But places like Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, China has been doing massive inroads in addressing all their island cities. Their innovation is super interesting to listen to follow the engineering behind. They are extremely innovative. I have to say they probably are one of the most prepared regions of the world. Probably the most fragile are probably Indonesia, Philippines, because of the extent of islands, thousands and thousands of islands, including the South Asian coastline. We are super fragile. And it has to do with the sand. There's no more sand. Everyone needs sand to build the dunes up. Where are we going to get the sand? Because wherever we pull the sand out is destroying the biodiversity there and creating other problems in that area. And unfortunately, this is what's happening in poor nations. They're selling their sand to rich nations. So all of this to say your question is really great. We could look at Amsterdam in Netherlands and see how that's comparing to like Indonesia, right? And you would see very different solutions.
Hi, thank you very much. That was a very interesting talk. I have a couple of nerdy technical questions since you seem to be quite up on the science of this. There are these oscillations, right? North Atlantic oscillations and the ENSOs, right? Equatorial oscillations, north-south oscillations, which often produce the things like the El Nino, La Nina, and things like that. I was wondering how these clouds, what winds take these clouds, or do they just generate their own? The Harmattan it must follow a certain kind of route, right?
Sure. Well, the Harmattan origins in Chad. There is a place called the Bordel Depression. The Bordel Depression is a fascinating region. It's a high ridge, and its bottom is extremely hot. And it's the albedo effect that's creating the Harmattan wind. Albedo effect is, so from what I understand, it's fascinating that the Sahara was a green space in 11,000 years ago. And around 4,000 years ago, with human occupation, settler habits settling in, the albedo effect, which is the reflection of light from the earth, heating up the earth higher and higher because grasslands were drying up and shrubland was expanding. So the particular case of the Harmattan is coming out, it comes out of the Bordel Depression, which is this large, super dry region of Chad. And Chad, apparently, and I didn't know this, the Chad River is this extraordinary marine environment that has shrunk like 90%. And that's through anthropogenic impact, unfortunately, over millennia. So aggravated by climate change and heating of the planet and all of these things. I mean, it's not just one thing, just one activity or one impact. But your question is a great one. With the case of the Harmattan, from what I understand, I am no climatologist. I was hoping there would be some scientists who could clarify or, give us some better explanation. Mine is entirely social science interest in the science papers. My understanding is it emerges out of the Bordel Depression as because of the way in which heating in the Sahara produces such high ridges, and these high ridges prevent cooling air from going forward. So it's a kind of a loop, a terrible loop. The higher because they're heating, the sands get higher. The higher the ridges, the cool air from the Mediterranean are not getting inland in the Sahara. So the Sahara is heating up even more. And then as people in the Sahara are desperate for shrublands or for grasslands, they take their cattle and their sheep and their goats, and they eat whatever grass is still remaining. And that generates even more evisceration of the landscape. And then shrubs expand, so there's less grassland that heats up. So this is the kind of intensification of heat. So the Sahara is expanding. The rivers are drying up, but it's all this very slow process of anthropogenic impact, and it's reached the turning point, or what's it called, the tipping point. But good question, and I cannot answer your very technical question. The Shamal wind is coming out of a similar situation out of Turkey and from Iran, Iraq, and Turkey, because it's a wind that's been generated again from the loss of biodiversity, deforestation. The dunes have been eroded, and the water has dried up. These rivers, they're all drying up, and so there's no interruption and cooling air to interrupt the flow of, and so as the wind comes, they're picking up more and more sand along the way. So by the time it hits the Persian Gulf, it's a storm of cloud of sand. And the IPCC report last year, this year, said the biggest challenges in the Middle East will be sandstorms. They're the most frightening things. They can take days and they can devastate a region. Because when this is happening in the Brazilian rainforest, because now Bolsonaro's policies have deforested the Brazilian rainforest, which was the world's largest carbon sink, is now a carbon source. And as the Brazilian rainforest shrinks and the Sahara sand is expanding and is carried over, so you have this layer of sand on top of depleting, eroding, rainforests. And so suddenly you have a serious imbalance in the ecosystems of the Brazilian rainforest as well. You know what? That desert is not far off. It's extremely frightening, actually. We have to.
I wanted to ask you is the kind of the opposite. I saw on your websites lots of dramatic activity indicating. I was hoping to see a Kathakali dancer or something.
Yes.
What they're doing and what you can tell us what.
Sure, you can invite me back and I can tell you with an elaborate. I have another hour-long talk on my theater work, but I thought this was a technical, theoretical community, and I didn't want to come across as the dancing entertainment situation, But yes, we can have both, and I usually do that. I didn't know what the community here was, so this is why I pitched my talk from the title to really address I wanted to ask some hard questions because I actually don't know the answers to my research. I actually want to get some ideas from you all because you're working on decolonial climate change, and I haven't had an opportunity to talk to a community that's actually addressed, because I work alone. I work in an art school. I have no funding. They actually took away my last funding. Can you imagine? I've written 6 books. They cut my funding. I have no funding to travel. It's horrible. But this is welcome to funding in America. So the point is, I do work alone, and I wanted to sort of talk to people here. But coming back to my theater work, theater in America is very capitalistic. It's all about entertainment and it's all about profit. As my accountant said to me, you have to dissolve your company. It's a bad business plan. I can't argue for your company anymore. And I had to. But here's the thing. That misses the point of theater. You're coming from India. Theater in India is a transformative tool. It's a democratic tool. It's a tool of change. It's a tool of investigation. It's a tool of engagement and embedment, and to embed yourself in a landscape. And so, and on my website has a lot of my performances, but the point is, I, decided, hey, look, no one's doing anything but climate. This is about 2009. The waters are rising. No one in America cares. And so I started doing work that made people in New York City aware that they are standing on landfill, that the 1609 water line is Greenwich Street. Sorry, I'm being very technical, but the shape of the 1609 water line is, let's say it's this, but Manhattan today is this. All of this is landfill. And there was a massive storm in 2012. And when they, wet sandy, yes, thank you. And when they layered where the flooding happened, they saw that it was all the area of 1609. Since then, reclamation was all flooded. It's low-lying regions. So, well, the Sandy created massive damage. The wealthy moved on. The poor are living with mold and asthma. And because the zoning law said that mold, this is federal disaster relief funding zoning, they say like they will replace, this is all about insurance. They will replace your house, but they will not pay for your mold reduction in your house. That's a private problem. So, and this gets gotten even more complicated since then. Yes.
Professor
Michael.
Joseph, I have a question from an undergraduate on Zoom. Would you like to ask?
Oh, hi. I'm so flattered.
Well, I as an undergrad really appreciate these talks, and particularly how interdisciplinary they are. It's really refreshing. We undergrads get lost in all these disciplinary silos. So I'm Charlie. I'm a senior at Duke. I study politics, philosophy, and econ. And so I was really impressed by this talk and thought just the point you made at the beginning about how there's not enough research on sand. It's just really compelling. I wanted to ask really about how can people who are closer to my age change the way we think about our careers and the way we think about these global issues so that we don't repeat the same paradigms? How can we be more interdisciplinary? How can we be more critical? I'm just wondering, as a professor and as someone who does theater,
right?
How do you change people's mindsets and expand consciousness really for people my age?
That is such a beautiful question, Charlie. I suppose you saw that picture of Greta Thunberg, arrested. And, she became a voice for your generation. But let me say, it's such a beautiful question that everyone should ask, right? And I think because the climate problem is it's a planetary problem, that I would say one small gesture at a time. So, I know how to write. I write books. I know how to edit. So I created a book series on climate change. I know how to teach. So I would take students to a different island every week in my teaching, my courses, to point out how the climate is impacting New York City's islands. So I'm one small gesture at a time is my small effort in the bigger climate. It's not a grand one. It's not a Greta Thunberg. It's one small gesture at a time. And my theater work is, to use sort of non-quantitative approach. This is how I think of it. Where the somatic, the emotional, the physiological, the tactile, the haptic, all of this can be brought into an engagement with the coast. Now, let me just say that the study of the ocean is very interesting. Most peoples in the world were not allowed near the ocean. New York City is a case in point. Robert Moses, when he built his city in 1930, he cut people from the ocean. All the highways of New York are on the ocean. There was no way to get there before the Bloomberg administration. There was no way to cross the road safely. All the highways in Manhattan, Cross Bronx Expressway, the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, these are all the best views of the city, were built for the car. So New Yorkers of the last 200 years, forgot their landscape, that they were in an island. They take buses, they take trains, they car. So your question of how can someone like you reach, I would say, is really, you should read this idea of post-normal climate science approaches. It's a carrion call to change how we think about everything, teaching, education, what we write, what we look at. So you might get ideas by reading these two authors, but it's a challenge is to say we're no longer in the era of specialization. Gone are the days where people got big jobs and big careers. It's now about the small actions, and everything we do has to be like meaningful for the larger planetary, But the thing is, we can't all do big actions. Like you can't change policy, but I keep telling all my students, hey, you want to be impactful? Please think about joining policy. In fact, even join the army. Like, why do you think the army is only for, those who cannot, from a certain economic demographic? Why are not the intellectuals and writers going to the army too? Because changing different sectors to think more, because some of the biggest installations are army bases, for instance, that have major climate impact in those regions, wherever they are, with the Caribbean particularly. But this is coming back to just to say the small gestures in your field, and what those fields are. Also, you're going to have to ask the questions, because fields are very slow to change because people are entrenched in their fields. But I think if you ask the question and you shape thesis questions that are interfacing fields, I think you have to be that change, because we need every good idea. And I'm not giving you suggestions, but that's what I tell my students who are architects and designers and planners. I'm like, if you don't ask the questions and think about ecology, think about the climate, then it's not going to happen.
I think we have time for just one more question, if anyone.
Can't speak.
Hi, yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Truly fascinating. And I loved the fact that you took us to Doha. So my husband and I spent quite a lot of time in Doha as well, but more
Really?
recently, 2010.
Oh, wow.
And so I have two questions in that connection.
Yeah.
One is about the dust clouds, the sand clouds that you said are so damaging and that are hitting the Gulf. Is there any way to harness that? Can the dust, can the sand be caught? And having lived for several years in the Middle East, the Khamsin is 50 days of hell.
Yeah.
Anywhere from Egypt up north.
Yeah.
And my second question is, okay, Qatar has spent a ton of money, but now they're tired. They had big success with the World Cup, and they've decided they're going to do something else. They're going to help the region. How can they? Instead of using the money, which I know they won't stop doing, but let's say they will. What can they do?
Can I say that this is so futuristic and so optimistic? I love it. I was just reading a book by Dan Rabinowitz, Israeli sociologist, teaching at Tel Aviv, brilliant book. And he says the same thing. What if we were to imagine like the world's worst autocrats and the worst oligarchs become the front of climate because they are so capitally driven, that they have investment for their own greed, they begin to impact how climate is handled. And he's referring to the most powerful states in the Middle East. So the shifting of this equation is that my husband's a physicist, so we're always talking about what's the science going on right now in climate, and he's extremely optimistic. He says there's enough science. We're not going to make 2 degrees. We're going to definitely exceed it by many, many degrees. But we have the science to still save our planet, not now, but in 75 years, if we make this effort now, because we're still waffling, and by all accounts, exceeded 2 degrees of what's going to happen in the next 25 to 50. It's frightening what we're thinking. So he's not talking about the short term. He's saying people are going to die. Now, I'm not going to cite my husband, but to say that the science, some scientists are optimistic on the science of clean energy, the science of harnessing wind, the science of transforming the albedo effect. Like, for instance, turn Sahara into green once again, to re-green the Sahara. This is not impossible. This doesn't require the African states getting their act together. There lies the challenge. There are many reasons why that is a huge challenge, but it lies in the hands of this vast resource, which is the African states, because there's no reason why that area cannot be once again livable. And there are all the signs of very expensive right now and not sustainable, like, taking water to sea and the desalination programs to desalinate water. Not sustainable at the moment. It's very poisonous, very toxic. Israel is doing it quite well, but it's very expensive and generates so much toxicity. So your question is a great one. And I think it's really, for me, also a place for optimism. If only that those massive football stadiums that Doha, that Qatar built, could be turned into new rainforests. Why not? Who the hell's stopping them? Their soccer isn't great. I mean, they import all their best players. They don't really play good soccer themselves. But turn them into new biomes. I mean, if there was some really one crazy sheikh, one of the sons who says, hey man, I want to join the movement. Like, what can I do? What? Did they? I've never been to Singapore. Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to go. Yeah.
Lee said all the
Oh.
the botanical gardens are in the northern places,
Yeah.
and white places. So we need, and they have all the tropical plants. We need botanical gardens in those of temperature.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, really? That's so interesting. But that actually is a great model. But let me just say the science behind the next 50 years of the Middle East specifically, because that's the question, is very interesting. Apparently, the southern part of the Saudi Arabia region, that means Yemen, Oman, is going to get very wet. 25% increase in precipitation. It's going to get a lot more flooding. The thing is, it's not good news because it's going to generate other kinds of issues. But the north, which is northern Israel, and like Iran, Iraq, is going to get so uninhabitable. It's very serious. So it's going to be extreme drying, but the southern part of the Middle East is going to get very wet because of the heating of the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and that action of climate action. So you ask me a very complex question. I don't want to get the science wrong. I'm only repeating research papers I read. I do not know the science behind it, but I was surprised by the findings that things would get wetter. But let me just come back to the Caribbean, because Michaeline invited me and I said, my paper would reach out to the Caribbean. And for the Caribbean, this bodes very serious issues, because the Gulf is expanding sideways. In other words, the warm water that has conventionally gone up towards the northern Atlantic, the Gulf Stream is now not having the place to expand northwards because of the melting of the ice and the Ross Ice Shelf. I mean, God forbid. I mean, this makes me religious, but, it's a serious situation. But so the impact for the Caribbean is serious because I do not see enough, for instance, American science funding that's invested in the Caribbean. Caribbean nations are small and they each expected to look out for their own national borders and shorelines and coastlines. And the problem is not being generated by them. It's being generated by the global north. They are the global north too, but the rich nations, the global north. So this divide that you just pointed out, and thank you for the great question, is such a huge one. And it needs a planetary governance, new governance models. And a lot of climate people are asking for new governance models that brings in the Fijis and the Maldives and the Caribbean islands like Barbuda, and into conversation with US and Western Europe. You know what? It's so interesting. I keep forgetting that the Persian Gulf states, Qatar, which is key, but it's interesting how they've never been part of their climate conversation. And I heard last week the representative from Qatar, who is now leading a major climate delegation from the Middle East, arguing for fossil fuels and expanding fossil fuels. And, this can be very productive. And I'm scared of saying these things in public, but I don't know if you heard him, but it was very disturbing. The argument for fossil fuel and, saying, we have made, green architecture. They're big stadiums. I mean, I don't know if you know the math on those stadiums. They're talking about their stadiums of green architecture, but super exploitative and super unsustainable mechanism that lay behind the 10-year plan. Yes, it is witching time. I've turned into a pumpkin.
We should close here.
Yes.
I want to thank you, Professor May, for your
Yes,
presentation.
thank you so much. Thank you all, and thank you for asking such wonderful questions.